You're watching Central. The time now is 10 o'clock.
Mirror man accused of being Israeli agent says it's a lie. American hostage free to meet daughter for the first time. Israeli minister threatens walkout if Madrid delegates are PLO. New restrictions on subs to stop them sinking trawlers. And a plea to end Iraqi sanctions to save these children's lives. Good evening. A senior journalist on the Daily Mirror was accused in the House of Commons today of being an Israeli agent and of negotiating the sale of Israeli arms to Iran. The owner of the Mirror, Mr. Robert Maxwell, was also alleged to have maintained a close relationship with the Israeli intelligence service. The allegations were made by two MPs, Rupert Allison and George Galloway, but come from a new book just published in Britain. The journalist, Mr. Nicholas Davis, foreign editor of the Daily Mirror, was also said to have betrayed Mordecai Vanunu, who was subsequently jailed for leaking details of Israel's nuclear program. The Mirror Group tonight called the allegations ludicrous and a total invention.
Tonight, the Daily Mirror described the allegations made against one of their staff as an act of total wickedness. The claims that the foreign editor Nick Davis is a long-standing and highly paid Israeli intelligence asset appear in a book, The Samson Option, published in this country at the beginning of this week. Today in the Commons, under the protection against libel of parliamentary privilege, two MPs tabled motions expressing concern and outlining the allegations, which are firstly that Davis betrayed the whereabouts in a hotel in London of Mordecai Vanunu, who was kidnapped and is now serving a long sentence for giving information about Israel's nuclear weapons program. And secondly, that together with this man, Ari Ben Menashe, Davis entered a business partnership in 1987, which negotiated the sale of TOW anti-tank missiles to Iran, contravening the UN arms embargo. One of the MPs, Rupert Allison, raised the matter at Commons question time.
Will he ask his right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, as head of the Security and Intelligence Services, to order an immediate inquiry into the alleged relationship between the Israeli intelligence service and Robert Maxwell, and in particular, Mr. Nicholas Davies, the news editor of the Daily Mirror?
If any questions are raised on this issue that justify an investigation by the DTI and any evidence provided, I'm sure that they would do so.
Mr. Davis in Harare totally rejected the allegations.
I categorically deny any of the allegations made in the House of Commons motions that have been put down today. They are a total and complete fabrication.
What about the man Ali Ben Menashe? Did you know him?
Yes, I did know him, and I first knew him in the early 80s, about 83, 84. And he was at that time a Middle East contact of mine.
He used your address for a company. Were you aware of that?
I was aware that he used the address. I had nothing whatsoever to do with a company. My name never appeared anywhere. I had no idea what he was doing. I never received at my address anything for the company. Nothing was ever done. I never saw anything, nothing at all.
You are also alleged to have told the Israelis about the whereabouts of Mr. Vanunu. Is that right?
That is totally untrue. I had nothing whatsoever to do with the Vanunu story.
The editor of the Daily Mirror, Richard Stott, attacked the two MPs concerned for hiding behind parliamentary privilege.
I think it's appalling, and for MPs who are constantly having a go at newspapers, I think they should put their own house in order, and I'd like to see both Mr. Allison and Mr. Galloway repeat what they said without the cloak of parliamentary privilege.
Tomorrow's Daily Mirror says Mr. Davis, backed by the paper, will take legal action against the publishers of the book. The proprietor, Robert Maxwell, will also contest the MP's allegation that he maintained a close relationship with the Israeli intelligence service. Robin White, News at 10, Central London.
Mr. Jesse Turner, who was freed last night after nearly 5 years as a hostage, is tonight waiting for his wife and daughter to join him at an American military hospital in Germany. He's never seen his daughter Joanne, who was born 5 months after he was kidnapped. Mr. Turner arrived at Wiesbaden from Damascus. He looked weak and walked with some difficulty.
It was a frail and clearly exhausted Jesse Turner who arrived at the American hospital in Wiesbaden tonight. At 44, he's the second youngest of the 4 hostages released recently, but today he's looked the weakest. He got a tremendous welcome from the staff and families at the hospital. These are the people who'll nurse Turner back to health and draw out gently the full horror of his near 5 years in captivity. In Boise, Idaho, Turner's hometown, his mother and wife had been waiting for news of his release.
I'm still in shock because I just, we waited so long, it's hard to believe.
I'm really happy because I hear about United Nations Secretary that he is welcoming the release of Jesse Turner, but I still want to see my husband.
His 4-year-old daughter, Joanne, has never seen her father. She was born 5 months after he was kidnapped. Jesse Turner looked drawn and tense when he appeared in public for the first time in Damascus this morning. The other hostages had all joked with the media. The former professor of mathematics almost seemed to be in a state of shock. He held his hands pressed tightly together as if he was still handcuffed.
I'd just like to say I'm very happy to be out finally, and looking forward to see my family and friends. And I wish to thank everybody for all the help they gave in exerting my release. And I know we'll continue to get all the hostages released.
Western diplomats aren't expecting another immediate release, but they do believe the United Nations has now established a pattern of negotiation and exchange which can be followed again as soon as possible. As he left the foreign ministry in American hands at last, Jesse Turner tripped and almost fell. He did not look a well man.
Let's move, let's move, let's move, get up! I'm sorry.
The unprecedented involvement of the United Nations in today's release has raised hopes that the whole process leading to the release of the remaining hostages may now be speeding up. 7 Western hostages remain in captivity, 4 Americans, 2 Germans, and Terry Waite. David Rose, News at 10, Damascus.
Israel's Deputy Foreign Minister, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, has told ITN that Israel would walk out of next week's Middle East Peace Conference if Palestinian delegates turned out to be members of the PLO. The PLO's leader, Mr. Yasser Arafat, said some delegates would be. Mr. Yitzhak Shamir, Israel's Prime Minister, said if they were, it didn't necessarily mean the talks in Madrid would collapse. Kevin Dunn at ITN reports.
With only 9 days to go to the Middle East Peace Conference, the region's historical enemies are jostling for position. The Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir, in Strasbourg to address the European Parliament, said Israel won't talk to Palestinians at the conference if they say they speak for the PLO.
If the representatives on the conference will say that they speak on behalf of the PLO, we will not speak with them.
Mr. Shamir did not say whether Israel would then walk out, but on Channel 4 News tonight, one of his ministers did.
What can we compromise with? Our existence is really not negotiable.
Are you saying then that if it becomes clear that any of these people are members of the PLO, if, for example, they stand up in Madrid and say they are, that you'll walk out?
I think you can assume that safely, yes.
The Palestinians who will go to Madrid were named today. Among the delegates, no officials of the PLO, but strong PLO supporters like Haidar al-Shafi, who said they sought only peace.
We are going to this peace conference with open minds and hearts to participate in making a just and stable peace.
But in Paris tonight, Yasser Arafat did associate the delegates with the PLO. He stopped short of saying they directly represented his organization, but he went mighty close.
Any Palestinian will be there, will represent the PLO.
Is the PLO going?
Because every Palestinian, anywhere, is a member in the PLO.
The hope of the Americans who brokered the peace conference is that despite their public posturing, both sides stand too much to lose if the conference fails.
The government has said that submarines must keep further away from fishing vessels. They must increase the present distance from 2,000 to 3,000 yards. The announcement follows the report into the sinking of the trawler Antares. It blamed serious errors made by the crew of the nuclear submarine HMS Trenchant for the incident. Antares and 4 of its crew disappeared in the Firth of Clyde last November after its nets were snagged by the submarine.
The fatal accident inquiry expressed grave concern over the serious errors and confusion on board the nuclear submarine which dragged the Antares down by its nets last year, killing all 4 of its crew. HMS Trenchant was on a so-called perisher's course for potential commanding officers at the time. The inquiry found a lack of positive command structures on board and no accurate picture of what was happening on the surface above them. It was a clear night with visibility of 8 miles when faulty electronics on the submerged Trenchant recorded 2 surface vessels at 7,000 yards. In fact, there were 3 trawlers, including the Antares, at just 700 yards from the sub. Minutes before the collision, Trenchant passed another fishing boat, but this was not reported to senior officers. At around 500 yards apart, as Trenchant was overtaking the Antares, its electronics at last gauged the correct distance. As the Antares turned to starboard, Trenchant turned to port. That turned the sub away from the Antares, but into her trawls. The Trenchant delayed surfacing for a full 33 minutes after the incident. The inquiry found no satisfactory explanation for that delay, which it said may have contributed to the loss of life. 2 of the crew from the trawler may have still been alive on the surface at the time. When the submarine did emerge, it saw 2 trawlers, confirming the faulty reading on their electronics, and it was assumed nothing was amiss. The widow of the trawler's skipper today welcomed the findings and backed the inquiry's call for new safety measures.
You think that's your Navy out there, our Navy, protecting us, and yet they can't detect a fishing boat, and our Navy has killed 4 of our men.
The Sheriff's main recommendations in his 57-page judgment include immediate action to increase the separation distances between submerged submarines and fishing boats to 3,000 yards from 2,000 yards, to consider relocating warfare exercises away from the restricted Clyde waters. He called for a review of emergency radio beacons on fishing boats and for a stricter approach on the placements of life rafts. The junior Defence Minister, Kenneth Carlisle, announced in the Commons today the first of those recommendations on safety zones will take immediate effect, but this hasn't silenced the critics.
There are whole areas of the ocean which fishing doesn't take place, where this submarine activity can be carried on in safety.
The Royal Navy has also been urged to cancel submarine training in the Firth of Clyde, scheduled to begin on a day in November that marks the first anniversary of the Antares tragedy. David Chater, News at 10 on the Firth of Clyde.
The Yugoslav Federal Army is calling up more reservists in the civil war against the Republic of Croatia. The draft was agreed by Yugoslavia's collective presidency, which is now dominated by Serbia. The Federal Army is continuing its advance on the Adriatic resort of Dubrovnik and has again bombarded Vukovar.
An international team of doctors and scientists has appealed for sanctions against Iraq to be lifted because of the growing suffering of its people. The team, which has just returned from Iraq, says children are among the worst affected, with infant mortality 4 times higher than before the Gulf War. Tonight, the Foreign Office Minister, Mr. Douglas Hogg, said Saddam Hussein's refusal to accept a UN proposal was prolonging the suffering.
The international study team of doctors and engineers say they were free to visit Iraq's 30 biggest cities and rural areas all over the country. They went to over 9,000 homes to ask about child health and about nutrition. Their report says that infant mortality in Iraq is now 4 times higher than before the war. 1 in 10 children dies before their 5th birthday.
For many times we do blood transfusion for them, you know. Some of them are surviving, some of them are getting over and so on, but most of them are dying then.
The number of deaths directly resulting from the war and the sanctions is in the tens of thousands. And those are children, and they're children that had absolutely nothing to do with this war.
These pictures were taken by the study team's own camera crew, filming, they say, without Iraqi government supervision. They show raw sewage in the streets and a water system on the brink of collapse. Waterborne diseases like typhoid and cholera are rife. The international team's survey shows half the Iraqi population are drinking contaminated water. Food is scarce. There is a government ration, but it provides only a third of nutritional needs. This woman said all she had to feed her family were these pieces of hard bread made from scraps. On the streets, food is for sale, but in limited amounts, and prices have gone up 2,000%. This man, without a job because of the war, said he couldn't afford to buy even a packet of biscuits. This woman and other mothers said they had no milk. They could only fill their babies' bottles with water and sugar. Iraq could raise money to tackle the crisis by selling oil, but to avoid the money being diverted from aid to more sinister ends, the UN has insisted on some tough restrictions.